well.
Good morning. I am thankful that today we can come together and worship God in spirit and truth. The title for today is He Knows. Are you glad that God knows what's going on in your life? I think in one way, it can be a blessing or a cursing. It can be good or bad. If we think, well, God knows what's happening in my life, then we might have reason to be scared. One article I was reading along these lines said it's reason to shake in our boots or it's reasons to jump with joy. Knowing that God knows what's going on in our life should give us reason to rejoice and to be happy. You think about what God knows. He knows everything, doesn't He? This morning we're going to look at a few things that the Scriptures point out that God knows that hopefully will bring us comfort and encouragement. This is the third week of the month. And in the third week of the month, what we try to do is look at topics that bring encouragement. And so there might be things that are going on in your life that you've been praying for and you feel like there is no end in sight. And so you need encouragement. You might be dealing with something that you look at your life and you say, I don't know when this is going to end. And you need encouragement. Hopefully this morning we draw encouragement from looking at the idea that God knows what's going on in our life. Think about things that you know. You probably know a lot of things. You probably know more things than I know. Some of the things you know, I don't know. Some of the things you know, I do know. Hopefully you know what 2 plus 2 is. Well, guess what? When I take off my shoes, I know what 2 plus 2 is as well. I can add them up, and there they are. There are things that we know together, and that brings us unity, right? When we look at things we know that we share in common, it brings us closer together. We have some common ground, right? And hopefully what we look at today is understanding that we share common ground together, that when life seems to be going wrong or is difficult, we can share this common ground together that we know that God knows what's happening in our lives. You know, we think about things that we know. Ben Franklin said about secrets, things that you know but you keep quiet, right? 3 can keep a secret if 2 of them are dead. There's information that you probably know that you're just dying to tell someone. There's information you know that no matter how much someone would ask you, there's no way you're going to tell the things that you know. So there are things that we know that perhaps are secrets that we keep from other people. And hopefully we know through this that secrets really aren't something we can keep from God, are they? We talk about secrets and information and knowing stuff. You know, knowing information is hard. One psychologist said, self-disclosure is a basic human tendency. Meaning, if there's a secret that you have, and it's a big one, at some point you've probably felt, this is about to eat me up. I have to tell somebody, right? And he says this is a common trait. In fact, in secrets, he says there is a secret spiral. That typically what happens is you have some information, a secret. And what you have to do is you have to repress it. You have to keep it a secret, right? And typically when you're keeping it a secret, there may come a time where you're about ready to slip up. And so you have to repress this secret. You have to keep it under surveillance. You have to not let it slip. And what that does is it causes stress in your life, which is why you want to tell somebody. Maybe it's your spouse, maybe it's a best friend. Hey, I've got this huge secret, and if I don't tell somebody, I'm going to explode, right? So there's this secrecy spiral. And then this thought emerges that the more you want to keep it a secret, the more you feel like you have to tell somebody. And so then it repeats, right? You think about it, Then you feel like you want to tell someone, but you remember it's a secret I'm not supposed to, so you keep it quiet, which causes you more stress, and you feel like you want to tell someone, and this cycle just repeats. Well, you think about what's going on in our life. It can either do one of two things. It can either bring you relief to know that God knows what's happening in your life, or it can bring you stress to know I'm trying to keep this secret, and when I know that God knows, that just brings me more stress. So hopefully when we think about the things that God knows, that it does, at the end of the day, bring us comfort. And that's the point of this morning. The first thing I want to show you this morning is when we think about all the things that God knows, I want you to see that He really does see what is happening in our lives. First of all, we're going to start in the Old Testament in Deuteronomy chapter 2 and verse 7. If you will, look at Deuteronomy chapter 2 and verse 7. When we study the Bible together, there's different ways to do it. Sometimes we stick to a certain text and we say, let's stick in this one area, kind of like we did last week, and see what we can learn from this one section where perhaps Jesus is teaching or Elijah is preaching. And sometimes to explore a topic, we have to look at different verses that are scattered throughout the Bible that talk about this topic. And so when we talk about what God knows, we have to look at a lot of different verses, and so that's why we're going to be jumping around to different places today. In Deuteronomy chapter 2 and verse 7, I want you to think about what's happening in this event. We're in the book of Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy means the second, deutero. Onomy means law, the second giving of the law. God's people have walked around in the wilderness for 40 years. They're ready to go into the promised land. And as they're ready to go into the promised land, God reminds them, here is my covenant. Here is the information I want you to know and to have, to keep, and to do. In Deuteronomy chapter 2 and verse 7, God reminds them, look, I've seen your difficulty. Look at Deuteronomy chapter 2, verse 7. It says, for the Lord your God has blessed you in all the work of your hand. He knows you're trudging through this great wilderness. These 40 years the Lord your God has been with you. You have lacked nothing. You think about the children of Israel, what they faced. Would you like to go on a camp out? For not just 1 or 2 days or 1 or 2 weeks, would you like to go on a camp out for about 40 years? You know, people tend to sell their homes and maybe move into a camper. And for about 3 to 5 years is about as long as it lasts. Then they're ready to settle down somewhere, put down some roots, and stop living out of a camper that is much, much smaller than what they would want. You know, the idea is sometimes romantic. We're going to travel the U.S. We're going to get a camper, and we're going to just live out of this camper. But after not too long, you get tired of it. Can you imagine camping for 40 years? That's what the children of Israel here are doing. Notice what it says in chapter 2 and verse 7. God saw their difficulty. He saw that for 40 years they've been wandering through this wilderness. Look, there's probably difficulty in your life, and you might think, nobody knows what I'm going through. Me personally, I feel like I've been sick for like 5 years now. For the last couple weeks, it's probably been like 2 weeks, we were out of town, came back, sick. I mean, we sanitized everything and in every way and washed hands before we ate everything. You know, you just get sick and you don't know why. And me in my life, here's what I'm doing is saying, when is it going to end? And yet I know of other people that have had chronic pain and illness for far longer than I've had this simple sickness. Yet you still wonder, does anybody know? Does anybody see? Does anybody care? And we have to remember that God does. He saw Israel wandering for 40 years, and they could ask, we've been doing this for 40 years. Does anybody care? Is God still up there? Does He still know what's going on in my life? Notice chapter 2 and verse 7 one more time. God saw their difficulties, and He saw them, I like this word, trudging around in the wilderness. Verse 7, for the Lord your God has blessed you in all the work of your hand. He knows your what? You're trudging. Does life sometimes feel to you like trudgery? Like you've been working at something and it doesn't seem to get better. You've been trying at your job and there's been no improvement. You've been trying with your spouse. You've been trying to patch up your relationship with your kids, and it seems like it's going nowhere. And it's trudgery. That's how Israel felt. The children of Israel walking around for 40 years. And God says, I've seen your difficulty. I've seen your trudgery. They needed to take comfort in the fact that God saw what was happening. Maybe at home you have difficulties. Maybe at home there are challenges. God sees. To me, that brings comfort. Maybe at work there are difficulties. You want to throw in the towel. But then you wonder, if I do, how would I pay the bills? Everything seems to be getting more expensive, doesn't it? And you wonder, how am I going to keep up with everything? And you wonder, who knows? Who cares? Well, God does. Maybe it's with your health and the difficulties. There are many reasons to rejoice. For several we've been praying for at Foristell, we've seen some improvement. For others, at times, you might pray for something and it doesn't go the way you want. And you feel like, I've been struggling with this in prayer, and it might feel like nothing has changed. Does God exist? Does He hear my prayers? Is it always going to be this way? We need to take comfort in the fact that God sees. Maybe it's with your finances that you find difficulty. Like we mentioned, everything seems to be getting more expensive, doesn't it? Gas has come down a little bit, but all the other groceries and supplies have gone up. You wonder, how am I going to make ends meet? And so what are you dealing with in life that you might feel like nobody sees, or perhaps I'm too ashamed to tell people what's going on because I'm struggling with this? So we need to take comfort in the fact that God sees what's happening in our life. He does see. He does care. If He saw what was happening to the children of Israel for 40 years, He did care. He did see. And He saw they were trudging through this wilderness, and yet He was with them. So what else can we learn? We know that God sees. He knows what's happening. And also, He knows what's in our heart. Have you ever had a moment where you're trying to genuinely help and you make things worse? Maybe you're trying to help someone with their car, and lo and behold, you're the one that locked their keys in their car. And you thought, here I was trying to help, and I made things worse. There was a time where Kayla and Malia were younger. I walk around the corner, and Malia was learning how to walk, still very unsteady. She had walked over to this stool, and typical of Malia, she likes to climb. She climbed up on the stool. There's Kayla, who comes by, who's 3 years older, grabs hold of her about the time I come around the corner, and to me it looks like my older daughter's about to push my younger daughter off the stool. So she got in trouble. Dad, I wasn't trying to do that. Well, that's not what I saw, right? Lo and behold, after a few disciplinary actions, my older daughter said, Dad, you've got it all wrong. Here's really what happened. That's not what I saw. So the discipline had already gone out. I acted too quickly to dole out the discipline based on what I saw. But my heart was, I'm going to try to protect everyone. My younger daughter looks like she's getting pushed off a stool. The older daughter looks like she's caught red-handed, and so she's going to suffer the punishment. You know, there are things we do that may or may not end up helping other people. That nobody really sees our hearts, but we're trying to help. Maybe that's you. You know, when you think about God, He knows what's in our heart. That there may be times we really genuinely do try to help, but sometimes we make it worse. But we're thankful that God ultimately sees our heart. I want you to turn over to John chapter 1. Excuse me. John 1, 43 through 49. This is a section where Jesus is calling disciples to come to Him. Andrew is one who brought many people to Jesus, including Peter. And in verse 43 it says, "The following day Jesus wanted to go to Galilee, and he found Philip and said to him, 'Follow me.' Philip was from Bethsaida, the city of Andrew and Peter, and Philip found Nathanael and said to him, 'We have found him of whom Moses in the law and also the prophets wrote, Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph.' And Nathanael said, 'Can anything good come out of Nazareth?' Philip said to him, 'Come and see.' Jesus saw Nathanael coming toward him and said of him, 'Behold, an Israelite indeed, in whom is no deceit.' Nathanael said to him, 'How do you know me?' Jesus answered and said to him, 'Before Philip called you, when you were under the fig tree, I saw you.' Nathanael answered and said to him, 'Rabbi, you are the Son of God. You are the King of Israel.' Jesus answered and said to him, 'Because I said to you, I saw you under the fig tree, do you believe? You will see greater things than these.'" We're going to pause right there. I want you to see Jesus sees Nathanael. What is Nathanael doing at this time? He's basically under a fig tree, and he's having a conversation with God. He's probably praying, talking with God. And what does Jesus say? "When you were under the fig tree, I saw you." Nathanael concludes, there is no way you can know what I was talking about or doing under the fig tree unless you really are the Son of God. And that is Nathanael's conclusion. Truly, you are the Son of God. But Jesus saw Nathanael. He saw him sitting under that fig tree. Someone might walk by and come to the conclusion, look at that lazy Israelite sitting there doing nothing. Would that have been accurate? No. But what did God see? What did Jesus see in Nathanael? Someone he could use. He saw his heart, someone who was spiritually minded. Sometimes we jump to conclusions on what people are up to or what their motivations are. Nathanael, no doubt, had doubts in his mind. Look at 45 and 46. He is called to come follow Jesus of Nazareth. And he says, "Can anything good come out of Nazareth?" There's nothing good from that area. That's like the slums. Can anything good come out of there? You see, he had his mind made up on what people from that area were like. He had judged his heart. And so once he was able to get over his doubt, he was able to see who Jesus really was. But Jesus saw his doubt. And in verse 47, he saw his heart. Verse 47 says, "Behold, an Israelite indeed, in whom there is no deceit." Now this is a side note. It's not going to charge you anything extra. Look at how often Jesus refers to Jacob. He says an Israelite. What was Jacob's other name? Israel. Also look down at verse 51. Here's what Jesus says to Nathanael. "Most assuredly I say to you, hereafter you shall see heaven open and the angels of God ascending and descending upon the Son of Man." What did Jacob in a dream at night see? Angels going up and down in a ladder. There was communication with God. Jesus says, if you will follow me and not doubt, because I see what's in your heart, if you will trust me, you will see great things. You will do great things because I see what's in your heart. We can trust that Jesus sees what's in our heart. Other people might have their minds made up about who we are and what we do and what we're all about, but Jesus sees our heart. And to me, that brings comfort. Because there are times when people judge your actions and they judge wrongly. One day I was trying to get my own car unlocked and somebody walks over, "Please stop breaking into that car, sir." It's like, "No, this is my car. My keys are locked inside. I'm trying to reach under where I've hidden a spare key," which is since not there, so don't even try. I hid a key and I was trying to get it out and then trying to open the car. But we can be quick to judge motives and hearts, can't we? We should take comfort in the fact that Jesus sees what's in our heart. With Nathanael, he had personal struggles. Verse 48, verse 49, he was struggling. He says, "Before Philip called you, when you were under the fig tree, I saw you." Here's what he's struggling with. Who is this Jesus? And in verse 49, Nathanael answered, Rabbi, you are the Son of God. You are the King of Israel. You might look a certain way where people would not assume you're a Christian. You might be from an area where people might assume, I don't think any Christians come from that place. You might drive the type of a car that's blowing smoke out the back as you go down the road, and people might think, I don't think any Christian would drive a car like that. Aren't we thankful that God doesn't judge the outside, but he sees the inside? That's what he saw with Nathanael. Nathanael's wondering, who is this Jesus? He commits to Jesus. He follows him. Nathanael is wondering, who is Jesus, and also, who am I? He says, you're an Israelite indeed, in whom there is no deceit. God saw his heart. People thought one thing about Nathanael, but Jesus shows who he really is. Someone who God loved and who God cared about. And that's who you are. God sees your heart. Others may judge you incorrectly, but God sees your heart and he cares. We might think, does God care? Maybe that's what Nathanael's praying about under this fig tree. We don't know his discussion. We don't know what he's asking God. We do know the end result. Jesus calls him and says, follow me. And he commits to following Jesus. As we think about this topic of God seeing our hearts, God does see our motivation behind the things we do. If you turn to the Old Testament, Joshua chapter 22 and verse 22. Joshua 22 and verse 22. Joshua 22 and verse 22 says, the Lord God of gods, the Lord God of gods, he knows, and let Israel itself know, if it is in rebellion or if it is in treachery against the Lord, do not save us this day. Now, if we back up just briefly, this is where the tribes are going to take over the promised land. They've marched closer toward the Jordan River, and some of them stopped and said, you know, we're going to settle on this side of the Jordan River. Others went over the Jordan River to go conquer Canaan's land, the promised land. And these tribes that stayed behind said, we'll go with you and fight. And these other groups were skeptical of their heart and skeptical of their motivation. And they said, well, here's what we're going to do. We're going to stack up a pile of rocks, and whenever you see it, you're going to know this is our commitment to you. Some tribes didn't want to go into the promised land, but were going to settle on the other side of the Jordan River. As a result, some tribes felt like this was a betrayal. Hey, we were all supposed to go into the promised land. You've betrayed us. You've let us down. But they really needed to see their heart, their motivation. What they do is they stack up this pile of rocks and they say, this is going to be a reminder. We are in this with you. Look at verse 27. But that it may be a witness between you and us and our generations after us, that we may perform the service of the Lord before him with our burnt offerings, with our sacrifices, with our peace offerings, that your descendants may not say to our descendants in time to come, you have no part in the Lord. What did they think of their motivation? They thought they were being treasonous, treacherous. They didn't want to be part of things. But they were mistaken. Their heart was, we want to do the right thing. We're just going to settle our families here if that's okay with you, but we will go with you into the promised land and help you fight. And they did. But their motivations were judged wrongly. Hopefully we take comfort in the fact that God sees what's in our hearts. He knows your motivations. He knows why you do what you do. And if you're doing right, then don't worry about what other people think. Take comfort in the fact that God knows what's in your heart. The other side of this, and another point we want to make, is God knows our secrets. As we started off talking about secrets, we need to know that secrets might be able to be hidden from people, but cannot be hidden from God. In 2 Kings chapter 6, I wanted to point this one out. I really do like it. But in 2 Kings chapter 6 and verse 12, there is a king of Syria, and they're at war, basically, with the people of Israel. And every time the king in Syria says, here's our plans, God hears it and tells Israel what his plans are. 2 Kings chapter 6 and verse 12, let's read. Let's back up to verse 11. It says, therefore the heart of the king of Syria was greatly troubled by this thing. And he called his servants and said, will you not show me which of us is for the king of Israel? He's basically saying, who in this group of people gave the information to the other people? Who's the traitor? That's what he's asking. So then verse 12, and one of his servants said, none, my lord, O king. But Elisha the prophet who is in Israel tells the king of Israel the words that you speak in your bedroom. What's the point of all this? God hears what is said behind closed doors. King of Syria has got these plans for what his army is going to do, and God tells Elisha. Who knew the information? Well, God did. We can't really hide anything from God, can we? We need to be careful, because what we say in secret, what you say in your bedroom, what you say on the phone when you think nobody else is listening, what you say to yourself in mumbled tones, be careful, because God hears. Really, the words that we say are always heard by God. The king of Syria had plans, didn't he? And God heard his plans. He was frustrated because somehow Elisha seems to always know what my next move is, because God heard, and God was telling him. So God hears the secrets that we plan, the secrets that we have. There's really maybe skeletons in the closet, but God knows what's there. God knows what is said in secret. And so what can we do? What we need to do is be genuine. In Romans chapter 2 and verse 21, really this is a critique against preachers. Romans chapter 2 and verse 21, for those that, and I think it applies to all Christians, for those that say, I'm a Christian, ask yourself, do you claim to be a Christian? If you do, then let's read these verses together. Verse 21 of Romans chapter 2. You therefore who teach another, do you not teach yourself? You who preach that a man should not steal, do you steal? You who say do not commit adultery, do you commit adultery? You who abhor idols, do you rob temples? You who make your boast in the law, do you dishonor God through breaking the law? For the name of God is blasphemed among the Gentiles because of you, as it is written. What's the point in reading that? God sees what's in our hearts, and so we as Christians need to be genuine. We need to be real with what's in our hearts, what's our motivation. Hebrews chapter 4, verse 12 and verse 13. Verse 12 says, for the word of God is living and active and sharper than any two-edged sword, able to divide between bone and marrow, joints and cartilage, able to judge the thoughts and intents of the heart. And verse 13 says, and all things are open and laid bare to the eyes of him to whom we must give an account. There are no secrets that God cannot see or hear. There are no secrets. So what do? We have to be genuine. If there's some sin in your life, you need to repent of it. You need to do it today. Get rid of it. Be genuine, because God sees. As we think about what God sees, he knows our weaknesses. He knows where we struggle the most. Psalm 103 and verse 14, and Psalm 103 in verse 14 reminds us that God knows our weaknesses. Psalm 103 and verse 14, for he knows our frame, he remembers that we are dust. Do you ever feel weak from time to time? Do you ever feel difficulties from time to time? Do you ever feel like life is hard from time to time? God knows. He understands that we are dust, that we're not as strong as maybe we think we are. God knows. He understands. Verse 14, he points out, we are like dust. We're like dust. Really, we are here a short time. James chapter 1, verse 10 and 11, talking about how we need to be careful of riches because they can appear and vanish in almost an instant. But I think it also talks about the shortness of life. Life is short. We're here but like a vapor. Life is short. We're here a short amount of time on the earth. So we need to make the best use of our time. And God sees that we are weak. In fact, one of the ways that God describes people, humans, we're like earthen vessels. And it says in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, God is pleased to put his message in earthen vessels so that we remember the power is with God and not us. Maybe today you're feeling good, you're feeling strong, you feel like, it's going to be like this for the next 20, 40, 60 years. But let's remember, one day will come, we don't feel as strong as we used to. We don't feel as sharp as we used to. We don't feel as intact as we used to. Our body doesn't move the way it used to. And through all of this, does God care? Absolutely, he cares. He knows our weaknesses. As we wrap this up, the last thing I want to point out, in talking about all the things that God knows, and I had many, many points that I had to trim back, otherwise we'd be here till late afternoon, because the Bible has a lot to say about what God knows, and we can't cover them all. But the last thing I wanted to end with is that God knows our eternal destination. I don't say destiny because I don't think it's planned out to the nth degree. We have a choice of where we can spend eternity. But God does know where we will spend eternity. The question is, through all of this, do we trust him? Going to one of the minor prophets, Nahum chapter 1 and verse 7. Sorry about that. I apologize for all my coughing. It will get better, trust me. Nahum chapter 1 verse 7 says, "The Lord is good, a stronghold in the day of trouble, and he knows those who trust in him." We might wonder, does God know? Does God see? Does he care? Does he understand? The Lord knows those who trust him. He knows. If God knows it, then who's to say he doesn't know it? God knows those who trust him. But our faith has to be genuine. We touched on this briefly, but I want you to see in Romans chapter 1 and verse 17. Romans chapter 1 and verse 17, you'll recognize it because Romans chapter 1 and verse 16, Paul says, "I'm not ashamed of the gospel of God, for it is the power of God to salvation to everyone who believes, to the Jew first and also to the Greek." He's talking about the power of God, but look at verse 17. "For in it, in the gospel, the righteousness of God is revealed from faith to faith, as it is written, the just or the righteous shall live by faith." How are you living your life? Is it only on how you feel today? Is it only on how you think people think about you? Is it based on living your life on what people's opinion is of you or what your opinion is of yourself? We have to be people of faith that trust God, that lean upon God, that know that I'm going to live by faith as best I can. I am not perfect, but I'm going to do the best I can and put the rest into the Lord's hands because he knows, he sees, and he cares. God knows what's going on in our life. He knows if our faith is genuine, and if it is, he knows if our name is written in the book of life. Philippians chapter 4 and verse 3. "For those whose names are written in the Lamb's book of life." Revelation chapter 3 and verse 5. The book of life, is your name written there? God knows. You probably know if your name is written there. And there's some who think their name is written there, but they haven't done a thing in their entire life to put their name there. We need to turn to God because He knows our eternal destination. And with God's help, we can have our name written in the book of life. If we turn to Jesus, if we're baptized into Christ, if we repent of our sin, if we confess that we want to follow Jesus all the days of our life, or if we're willing to live as genuine Christians who live by faith, for it says the righteous will live by faith, will we be people of faith? Will we live the way God calls us to live? Why? Because God knows our eternal destination. This morning, maybe there's encouragement that you need. Maybe you've been discouraged for far too long. These are sermons that are for me, and if they help you, then I'm happy. From time to time, we need encouragement, don't we? We need to know that God knows what's happening in our lives, and He cares. If there's encouragement that you need today, we want to pray with you and for you. That's what we're here for. To walk down this aisle is not a shame. It's simply a step in the right direction to say, I just need encouragement. And if you're not a Christian, what you need to do is to be baptized into Christ to make sure that your name is in that book of life. Don't you want to see it there? Don't you want God to know that it's there in the book of life? And there are times where we can act not like Christians. We cannot live by faith. We can have our name taken out of the book of life, but God is always willing to put it back in. And so today, if you need encouragement, if you need strength, if you wonder if anybody knows and cares, God does. If there's any way we can help you, let us know as we stand and sing the invitation song.